So today I want to look at the definition of I. What does I mean? I is a word, in this case of the English language, and the English language is a tool for us to communicate between humans. So I is a word that we use, in this case for me, to communicate something about myself, about this human here, to you. Which I find very interesting to think about, that the word I, which is kind of the most representative of ourselves, kind of has the least functionality for ourselves. Like I is mostly used for me to talk about myself to you, and not so much for me to think about myself. In that context, it has a lot less value, I think, than actually we think about. I also want to look now at another side. I think culturally we very much think about I just from the word and how we think about ourselves as one being. We are one human, we are one being, we are a living being. But when we look at living beings, when we look at the edge of where do we kind of agree where life starts and where it ends, currently in science, the line where it's kind of debated, where we should put it, is kind of on viruses. Some say viruses are life, some say viruses are not life. I don't know how big and how actually big and how decisive this disagreement is. But that's kind of where the lies. You can look at it one or the other, are viruses life or not. But we pretty much agree on a whole that, well, a singular life, a cell, a bacteria is a life form. And we pretty much agree also on top of that, well, multiple cells can form multicellular life, and that's a life form too, where they are actually one life form made out of a few others. And it's not just few others, we as a human are a very multicellular life form. We are created of, I don't know, billion, trillions, whatever. It's a very huge number out of cells and just organisms that form us as a collective. And we have single cells, and then go in multicellular structures, and they build our organs, our skins, our heart, whatever, our muscle tissue. So there are a lot of parts of ourselves that are actually individual life forms, and you could potentially even subgroup them. I don't know if we would consider just the heart or just the brain or just our immune system as single life forms. We even have life, like in our digestive system, we use bacteria that are not even from our body, but that's not even from our body considered. That's to us, but it's more a symbiosis of a connection where we just have outside life that lives with us and others that harm us. So it's not even in what we consider us that all of us, even kind of by a more low level definition, belongs to us. But just from that perspective, we are made out of a collective. We are a group. There are so many living beings that make a human, that make me. And I just, as a side note, I find it really interesting and fascinating that we stop to think and to think about, okay, a life form in the group can create a new life form, and kind of stop it as a human. We see like a human that's like one living being. And for some reason, we don't look at families and communities as cities, as states, as a life form on their own, where we are just one cell of that life form, of that multicellular meta-human kind life form, which I don't see if you agree that, well, if multicellular lives are a life form that is made out of smaller ones, and we are humans that group up and create collectives and communities and families, how does it stop there? I don't see a reason for this dynamic, for this categorization to stop at a human level and not go above where you see the same patterns. I find it a little bit weird that we don't think about it in the same way. I think if you do, but I think like in our cultural thinking, that's something that we don't consider as much, which I just find interesting. But back to the I, the definition of I. So we are not just on a biological level, not just one being, where you can just draw the line of this is where I start, this is where I end. We are also very different on a mental side. We are not the same on every day, in every state, in every environment. We act differently depending on our moods, on circumstances in life phases. We change just from our mental side. We can be very different. So there's also very much the question of where do what I am, how behave, where does it start and where does it end? It's not very clear. So you can have even like I think a separation of what's me and what is I on like a mental side, and how can someone perceive that as me differently depending on different times and depending on different circumstances. Just to throw this in there's also separation of, there are separate parts of us. We could look into conscious parts and unconscious parts, and there are a lot more of different mental parts that come together to create who we are and what I at the end is. And I like to when I think about these things, what I'd like to take from this is that when we draw these lines, if we want to draw them at all, which in some cases is very necessary and helpful, it's a very important, it's a very subjective thing where we draw them. It's very much depends on who is drawing the line and why are we drawing such a line. That makes very much where we place them. Where do we place where I starts, what I means, and where does it stop? It's, I think, a very subjective thing and a very subjective element that changes from person to person, from societies, from cultures to cultures. And every subjective line is always a very vague, always a very uncertain thing to draw, even if it's helpful. But I think it's always very helpful and important to know why we're drawing lines and who is drawing line, how are they different from where I put my line of what I means, and where do you put the line of what I means. I hope you find some of these thoughts interesting, and I wish you a nice day.